The world oceans have for millennia been the site of the unknown. Its sheer depth and scale strikes fear into the hearts of both humans and animals alike. From great white sharks to the 120-foot lion's mane jellyfish, predators below the ocean's surface are in abundance. However, the rise of humanity has significantly increased the number of predators lurking beneath the ocean. From the turtle, built in 1775, to the U-boat designed by the Nazis in the Second World War, humanity has found a way to use the depths of the oceans for warfare. Now, the United States has taken this one step further with the introduction of the Manta Ray, a massive uncrewed underwater vehicle that is set to re-establish the superiority of the United States Navy. This is how America's futuristic underwater drone will change warfare forever. The first mention of this very unique and secret project was made in a news statement released by the Department of Defense in February 2020. This is nothing new, as these reports are released often to give an indication of where defense spending is going. But alongside new projects for missiles, aircraft carriers, and various other vessels, there was one section that immediately caught the attention of military experts across the world. After sifting through all the regular suspects, another important announcement was made, and this was for the Manta Ray UUV. The rumor mills immediately began to turn, with this DARPA project being shrouded in secrecy and Lockheed Martin being awarded $12 million for this underwater program that is set to change the course of underwater warfare. Mystery continued to surround the program, with details being scarce from the Department of Defense, until 1 year later in 2021, when DARPA released its own statement, suggesting that 3 companies would be working on it. Even more surprising was the fact that Lockheed Martin would now no longer be listed as part of the development. In fact, the 3 companies were Northrop Grumman, Metron, and Martin Defense Group. By the time the program advanced into Phase 2 of funding, things became a little more clear, with DARPA suggesting that the idea of the program was to create something that could work underwater for long durations of time. But what's more, the underwater vehicle will be completely autonomous, without the need for on-site human interference, nor does it have to go through extended periods of maintenance. In fact, the project seemed like an underwater computer that would simply just do some reconnaissance work below the ocean. Moreover, DARPA suggested that this drone would go even further, where it can potentially deal with barnacles attaching themselves to the surface of the drone and fixing corrosion that happens through such extended stays. The drone will also be designed to detect underwater threats and find a unique way to overcome them, while being able to perform critical missions at sea that usually require the use of advanced U.S. submarines. But what's even more mysterious is the fact that this Manta Ray does not use any conventional form of energy, which includes diesel, steam, electric, or nuclear. Basically, the drone would be tasked with generating its own source of energy in the dark depths of the ocean. A task that is not as easy as it might sound, and perhaps even feels like a scene from a science fiction film. The first images of the Manta Ray would finally be released by the end of 2021, and it looked eerily similar to its namesake, the Manta Ray. In fact, if this was posted as an image of the next U.S. 6th-generation stealth fighter, it might have been even more believable and sent a signal of fear to enemies of the U.S. But this was a new underwater weapon, and one that would perhaps change the landscape of underwater warfare. Program leader, Commander Carl Werner, had the following to say about the Manta Ray. Manta Ray is uniquely positioning itself to simultaneously introduce a new class of underwater vehicle, while contributing key component technologies to other vital undersea programs. This statement was clearly proof that the United States was about to launch something that could perhaps change the landscape of underwater warfare forever. But was it just talk? Things went a bit silent following the big talk of the project in 2021, with DARPA focusing a lot of its efforts on testing various underwater technologies and figuring out exactly how they could deliver on the promises. According to Northrop Grumman, numerous active tests were conducted until April of 2024. Northrop Grumman would not only announce the Manta Ray, but also offer a full-scale demonstrator, which had been spending the previous couple of months off the coast of California, traversing the unique underwater landscape and performing a few test operations. Finally, the project was successful, and judging by the optimism of DARPA and the confidence of the organization, this could almost certainly be a very unique and interesting addition to the United States Navy. However, the reveal of the Manta Ray was not really conducive to the public, and while we can see how it looks, very little other information has been released. For example, no one truly knows whether or not the Manta Ray actually carries any weapons, or how fast the vessel might be. What about the endurance it supposedly has underwater? Yes, these are all questions that were not revealed following the demonstrator, and with good cause as well. Since this is the first of its kind, and as Commander Warner suggested, it might play a vital role in contributing to the U.S. naval technologies, there is absolutely no way that DARPA would release all the classified goodies you probably want to see. In fact, the only thing we do know about it is what it looks like, and even with these images, it might take someone as intelligent as Neil deGrasse Tyson to perhaps discern the actual dimensions. What we do know is that the Manta Ray is big, really big given the size comparison to the observation boats and dinghies spotted escorting it. The drone itself represents an actual Manta Ray, being slightly wider than it is long and having a sleek, yet flat design, supposedly to make it more aerodynamic. Moreover, the propulsion method is also still unknown, but this is simply because it is likely positioned at the underbelly of the Manta Ray, and Northrop Grumman might not yet be able to reveal this kind of technology. But all accounts suggest that this is a self-propelled vehicle with the ability to recharge itself. Two eye-like slits are also found at the head of the Manta Ray project, which is supposedly added to help the drone detect whether or not there are any obstacles and perhaps serve as the eyes for those who might be looking through the onboard camera. Yes, we can pretty confidently state that there will be at least one kind of camera on the vessels to feed information back to DARPA once the vessel has been deployed for its operations. Even more interesting is the fact that this unique unit will probably use gliding as a way of saving energy. Since it might not need a lot of maneuvering for these long journeys, the Manta Ray could even ride ocean currents, allowing it to build up some speed. However, when the thrusters kick in, many will be waiting to see exactly how this unit gets powered and what might be needed to get it to a specific destination. Another striking noticeability from the Manta Ray images is the weirdly designed coating. In fact, you might think that there is no coating even applied, and the unit itself could theoretically be visible judging by the prototype. But an even more likely explanation is the fact that perhaps the actual coating is not yet revealed to keep the Manta Ray shrouded in secrecy. In fact, the United States will need to apply something that makes it a little harder to spot via underwater sonar, which could become a problem if the unit gets too close to a warship from another nation. Perhaps the main idea of the US Navy is to have enemies mistake it for, well, a manta ray, which is commonly found in oceans all over the world. Moreover, no country will waste millions of dollars of underwater weaponry as a way of trying to wipe out all manta rays in the ocean. Moreover, DARPA did mention that transporting the vessel on land is not that complicated. The vessels can be dismantled and placed into about 5 shipping containers before it is driven to a specific location for redeployment. However, the Manta Ray will more than likely be used for long-term operations, which means that once the unit has been deployed in the water, it will remain in the ocean for months, or possibly even years. So, how does it remain in the water without needing any recharge? Following all of these interesting revelations, another unique design captured the eyes of the world, and this was in regard to how the Manta Ray would manage to regenerate energy. Various ideas floated around, but then it was revealed that a small contraption would be released from the top of the Manta Ray. In essence, the Manta Ray would dive to the ocean floor, where it would anchor itself to the bottom. The top hatch would open, releasing a small contraption that would naturally just float in the water with the various currents. This current supposedly uses these currents to generate energy before it dives back down into the hatch, and the Manta Ray is ready to proceed further with its mission. In layman's terms, it basically converts energy from the thermal gradient of the ocean. But this is not the only method used by DARPA. In fact, there is no clear option that has been already determined to be the #1 go-to method to be used by the Manta Ray. Another alternative is something called reversed electrodialysis, drawing voltages from water salinity. This method involves using various compartments and having a combination of both fresh and saline water. A process on the inside of these compartments and membranes works together to help create an electrical current that is said to propel the vehicle forward. Now, designing a vehicle such as this is very interesting. But even more interesting is the way that the vehicle will be able to communicate with the US Navy once it is deployed. A look at current technology reveals just how difficult this could be. How does the Manta Ray communicate with home current autonomous vehicles are very interesting, and they all have severe limitations when it comes to communication. Currently, these vessels will need to resurface occasionally for it to be possible to communicate. While this is great, it is not yet the most advanced method and can be rather frustrating and even make the vessel seem a little vulnerable. Secondly, the Navy often uses cabled vehicles that require the autonomous drone to be close to a monitor vehicle, and communications will be transferred via the cable itself. Unfortunately, this can greatly impair the stealth that these vehicles are usually designed for. But what DARPA has planned for the Manta Ray is a little bit different. What seems more likely is the data bubbles, as the organization refers to, and these data bubbles are specifically designed to be placed throughout the ocean and relay communications. The fact of the matter is that this vessel is specifically designed to be even more advanced than the current communication methods used by other autonomous underwater vehicles, and whichever method is being used will more than likely be groundbreaking. This is possibly the reason why the vessel itself and its specifications are so heavily protected, further explaining why everything surrounding the details of the unit is kept so secretive. Now, you might be wondering what the purpose of such an expensive project might be, and what is the actual reason for spending millions of dollars to develop it. One of the purposes outlined by Commander Warner is that the Manta Ray could be used for a variety of civilian purposes. Since humans have only managed to map about 10% of the world's oceans, the Manta Ray could be used for advanced and precision mapping of the world's oceans. Moreover, it could also be used for understanding ocean environments and the various habitats that often arise from the ocean. This could play a vital role in securing the oceans. The unit itself has a lot of potential for civilian uses, with all of these being to further improve the world and to create safer and more prosperous ocean life around the globe. Like how Tesla was designed to reduce the carbon emissions from fossil fuels emitted by motor vehicles. But as we all know, the Manta Ray project is closely linked to the United States military, which immediately proves that the main purpose of its development could be related to underwater warfare. In fact, DARPA didn't mince their words either, stating that the Manta Ray could help understand the complex nature of underwater warfare a little better. What makes more sense is the likelihood that the Manta Ray will be used as an intelligence-driven unit. Its main focus will more than likely be its ability to navigate the oceans unseen and gather intelligence that will subsequently be used by other naval vessels to carry out military tasks. Moreover, the size of the Manta Ray leaves the door open to suggestions that perhaps the vessel could be used to carry its own weaponry. In fact, it could theoretically serve as an unmanned submarine, keeping the lives of US sailors safer if they are not the ones who have to carry out these operations. In fact, we can list a ton of theoretical missions that would make sense for the Manta Ray to carry out. Instead of sending submarines into enemy waters to collect intelligence, the Manta Ray could be used to carry out these missions undetected. Should they eventually be detected, the United States can use the same plausible deniability of the Chinese following the spy balloon incidents. Moreover, It can be used to help strengthen the underwater capacity of fleets. Imagine an aircraft carrier strike group having a few Manta Rays it could deploy to scour the ocean for any submarines possibly lurking beneath. But even more impressively is the fact that it could even be loaded with various forms of weaponry, and even go as far as taking down the underwater weaponry of other naval organizations, especially enemies of the United States. The fact of the matter is that the Manta Ray could be used for a variety of different operations, and it should theoretically be able to do these things far better than any current form of technology. This will give America the edge when it comes to the ocean, despite currently trailing the Chinese Navy in several capacities. For now, the Manta Ray offers two hypothetical solutions, with one being on the offense and the other being a defensive posture. As mentioned, we don't have any information yet about whether or not the Manta Ray can be loaded with torpedoes, but strapping a bomb to the vessel is far more likely, and the Manta Ray can then be transformed into a kamikaze underwater drone. In fact, Ukraine has proven just how effective the use of surface drones can be in striking down expensive enemy equipment, which limits the costs. This is also the current trajectory of where modern warfare is heading, with fewer soldiers in uniform fighting the battles, but rather a few highly trained drone operators conducting warfare from thousands of miles away. Add this same scenario, but to underwater vessels, and you have a real threat that will keep enemy navies on their toes, not knowing where the next attack might come from. A look at the current situation in Taiwan might explain this best, but it is still completely hypothetical. Since tensions in the South China Sea seem to be at an all-time high, and various plans are in order from China who will likely make a move on Taiwan, it could be one of the first flashpoints that lead to the use of the Manta Ray in an offensive capacity. Let's say that China does make a move on Taiwan. It will automatically force all US power in the region to kick into gear and set out to protect Taiwan. However, these vessels will be outnumbered, meaning that survival will be the main purpose. The United States will likely launch many more naval vessels, but they will still need to traverse the Pacific Ocean. Since China is highly advanced in satellite technology, it means that these vessels can be tracked, and China might come up with a plan to destroy them before even reaching the conflict zone. Now, if the Manta Ray is launched, it might take more time, but reinforcements can arrive without China even noticing. However, a more likely and even scarier proposition is that once the United States has a fair few of these vessels, they can simply launch about 100 or 200 of them now from the mainland. These might take a few weeks, but eventually, the Manta Ray will likely reach Chinese waters, where it can simply sink to the bottom of the ocean and remain dormant for weeks on end. A program could be installed, which allows it to resurface every couple of weeks, simply checking for any orders that might suggest it needs to kick into action. If hundreds of these Manta Rays are laden with bombs and lie dormant in the Chinese oceans, it could lead to one hell of a surprise if China does decide to make a move on Taiwan. It could buy the US not only time for reinforcement to arrive, but even cause significant damage to expensive Chinese vessels. The same principle could also be applied to Russia and any other country with a powerful navy and looking to attack the United States. But one thing that is easy to forget is how functional it might be when used in a defensive capacity. By its own admission, the United States has mentioned that it currently does not have a big enough capacity to monitor its own coastlines for enemy submarines. Yes, this means that it could be living close to a Russian submarine that is merely lying in wait and looking for order to attack. Building the surface vessels to detect all of this can be expensive, and more importantly, it will take a very long time to do so. This is time the United States currently does not have, and with the world being close to World War III, the Manta Ray might need to serve as a defensive drone. The Manta Ray will likely have some detection technology built in, which means that it could be deployed around the United States, with its primary mission to scour the oceans for any potential threat. Add a few torpedoes to its payload, and the vessel will likely destroy possibly anything in its path, even wiping out fleets of submarines before ever being detected. This proves just how efficient the Manta Ray could be in an offensive and defensive capability, but also leads to another question of exactly how enemies of America feel about it, or how they will react. Following the Ukrainian conflict with Russia, the entire mantra and scope of warfare have significantly changed. Instead of aircraft and warships dominating the battlefield, more and more nations have reverted to using cheap and disposable drones. In fact, Ukraine managed to wipe out most of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, despite not having a single vessel of its own. This was done by way of surface drones, or boats that were remote-controlled and packed with explosives. These remote-controlled vessels would come as close to the large Russian ships as possible before detonating, which is exactly what happened to the Moskva. In terms of aerial warfare, it is the exact same, and instead of launching millions of dollars worth of ballistic missiles, both Russia and Ukraine have resorted to cheap kamikaze drones, causing an equivalent level of damage, but at a far cheaper price tag. The only thing missing from this kind of battlefield is having underwater drones, and to this date, no information from any other country has been revealed, showing these kinds of drones being operational. However, rumors have suggested that the Chinese are currently in the development process of such technology that will likely even out the underwater battlefield. Nevertheless, the Manta Ray is specifically designed for this purpose, and as of this video, we can safely say that the United States is firmly in the process of finishing up development, or they might be on the cusp of actually launching such a drone. As for other nations who happen to stumble onto this information and realize the level of threat the Manta Ray can pose, it will certainly change the way in which they approach naval warfare. In fact, knowing that a Manta Ray might be lurking beneath the ocean is a scary thought by itself and could lead to counter-technology being deployed. You can bet your life that China is also closely monitoring the information and already planning on what they can do in order to prevent the Manta Ray from ever reaching its shores. Perhaps the use of more submarines and better sonar technology could be its only saving grace. Moreover, all nations would likely want to capture or at least destroy one of these vessels to get their hands on the technology. This is perhaps something the US Navy needs to account for, but having a self-destruction button will likely help to protect the US technology aboard the Manta Ray. Aside from this conventional form of underwater warfare, the United States could possibly deploy the Manta Ray as part of its submarine fleet. Adding a few of these drones to the submarine and allowing it to fire the drone to conduct various missions could also prove useful, especially given the current quality of the US submarines. And finally, there is the big concern of whether these Manta Ray vessels could add a fourth branch of nuclear warfare. Currently, three main branches of nuclear warfare are commonly known. The first is the traditional bombers, which have been around for decades and are usually designed to fly over an area carrying a nuclear bomb and dropping it down to the target in a far more conventional way. The second is submarines, which are often filled with nuclear ballistic missiles that can be launched from the ocean. Many of these also carry nuclear warheads, bringing the ordnance closer to the enemy shore. Finally, there are the more conventional ballistic or intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBM, that are usually launched from land and must penetrate the atmosphere before they eventually reach their targets. This is the most likely method a nuclear warhead will be deployed in the 21st century. But now, nations are all scrambling to build their own form of nuclear deterrence to ensure that mutually assured destruction is always a threat when a nation wants to launch something that goes boom. However, the Manta Ray can add a brand new dimension to this, and it can offer the United States the ability to perhaps carry smaller nuclear packages in an underwater drone. However, it doesn't have to be fired from the Manta Ray. Although this might be preferred, it can also be just loaded to the Manta Ray and serve as a nuclear kamikaze drone. Where these might be used is the real question, as nuclear weapons exploding in the ocean is still heavily frowned upon and might even draw the ire of a few environmentalists such as Greta Thunberg. The fact of the matter is that the Manta Ray seems more like a multi-role fighter drone, and should the United States manage to build it at an affordable price, It will quickly become pivotal to underwater warfare. But what do you think of this brand new weapon? And will it be used in a military capacity? Or will the drone itself merely be used for civilian purposes? Make sure to let us know in the comments below, and please subscribe to our channel or all your naval content.